what would an AI automated weapon potentially look like?
Very basically definition, it's a weapon system of some kind that the machine makes the decision on its own to attack. So there's like no human intervention. So like you're saying, like it recognizes that today this person's on the top 10 most wanted list, and the image is captured somewhere, and the AI system makes a decision. Okay, I'm going to send a drone to take a strike and take that person out.
The following is a conversation with Neil Sahota, the lead artificial intelligence advisor to the United Nations. Unsurprisingly, this was a fascinating conversation. We talk about the UN's role in coordinating the international response to AI, some of the biggest opportunities ahead of us, as well as the very real global threats to manage. This is starting to affect us all, and Neil did a brilliant job of framing how to think about what's happening, some great advice about how to approach employment in this new era, and how we work with AI rather than against it. I think this is one of the most important interviews that we've done so far, so it is absolutely worth your time, and thank you very much to Neil for coming on. His links and everything else you need are in the description, so enjoy this episode. Neil, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's going to be an interesting conversation, no doubt, so I'm excited for this.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Luke, and thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, man. So let's start. Maybe you could just explain to people your role, because it's a super interesting role. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
I wear a couple of hats, but I think part of the most important one is I serve as the United Nations AI advisor. So I help them actually create the AI for Good initiative, which is essentially using AI and other emerging technology like the metaverse to actually create solutions around the Sustainable Development Goals. So for people that are not familiar with that, that's 17 goals the member nations agreed to try and create a better world and society. So things like zero hunger, access to justice, good health. I won't bore you with the whole 17, but hopefully you get the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Okay. And yeah, I mean, we've covered AI in various forms on this show, from a good few months ago, and it's really become into public consciousness. I don't want to fearmonger, because there's loads of great things happening as well. But I do think, speaking to kind of my friends who aren't necessarily working in this world, like it's interesting seeing what filters down to them. And I am starting to get some messages where people are kind of getting worried. I mean, at first we saw a lot of kind of fun, interesting tools, ChatGPT, obviously, kind of boosting productivity. That was really interesting. Then things like voice cloning, and more recently, kind of really impressive, accurate text to video and kind of lip syncing things. And there's the sort of conversation around the rumors of job losses and that kind of thing. But the writers and actors strike, we're seeing sort of the first public consciousness of that coming. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about sort of global coordinated responses to AI as a matter of security as well. So kind of how are you thinking about the moment that we're in right now in regards to AI for sort of the average person?
It's interesting, Luke. There's a lot to unpack there, right? I think the average person has really become real, right? I think ChatGPT changed the equation at the beginning of the year, because now you have a system like that can do some routine daily tasks for the average person. So suddenly they can use it. It's not like these specialized things that were happening the past 10, 12 years. And I think for some people, they're like, that's just cool. It can help me find a job, do this. And for some people, it freaked them out, because they're like, wow, this thing can do some of the things that I do. What does that mean, right? And I think, like you mentioned, the writer's strike, I think that's part of what's going on there. And that, if I remember correctly, they actually struck early, right? I think it struck, a couple of months before anyone was expecting, in large part because what they saw ChatGPT go from 10,000 users to 100 million users in 4 weeks. And they realized that, wait a second, you could use ChatGPT to help write like movie scripts or TV scripts, right? It can't do it all by itself. But I think that's one of the things, because one of their demands is there's no use of AI to make movies and TV shows. But there have been a lot of AI tools like cinematographers, video editors, sound editors use. So they're kind of freaked out because they're like, wait a second, we need to use those tools. So it's the challenge. I kind of wish, I think this is why the mindset's so important, that they're kind of wired to look at things as a threat, right? I think in Western culture, because of the way we grew up, movies, books, was always human versus machine, Luke, right? So it was always adversarial. Whereas you look at like Eastern culture, their books, movies, that kind of stuff, that machines, AI, robots are always helpers, assistants. So in Western culture, we look at things like the writers, they see a threat and say, whoa, this could take away some jobs. It could. Whereas in Eastern culture, they're wired to look for opportunities and say, hey, I could use this tool to write more scripts, better quality scripts, and make more money. So I think that's the challenge that we have. That's the challenge I think the average person has is when we look at these tools, is it a threat or is it an opportunity?
Yeah, that's well framed actually, and it's good to think about it on a global scale like that as well. Yep, you can approach it in a couple of different ways for sure. When you're having these conversations on with the UN and I know the United Nations Security Council held its first kind of formal discussion on AI last month. What things you talk about there? What was to come out of that conversation?
There are a few things that we had to tackle, right? I don't think anyone's going to dispute the need to regulate AI and what's good policy and legislation. I think the first and foremost question was we want to ask, should the UN be involved? And of course, the answer is yes. The second is what kind of role should the UN take? And then based off of that, what's kind of the right structure, framework to make that happen? And I don't think there was really a lot of pushback against the UN playing some role. In fact, the United Nations is probably one of the few organizations out there that really has the trust and the credibility to kind of lead this effort, right? If I hate to say this, one of the big tech companies came out and said, hey, we will lead this effort, people will be like, well, what are they going to get out of it, right? Why are they doing this? They've got some secret agenda. That's the one advantage I think the UN has is no one is saying there's a secret agenda there. Then the question becomes is what's the right structure? You put this in an existing agency, you form a consortium, and then, we were kind of debating internally that very question when the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, kind of maybe jumped the gun a little bit last week and announced that the UN should form an agency just on artificial intelligence. So that was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, that's one of the ideas that was being tossed around. Perhaps even an agency just on the governance of science and technology, but because it wasn't kind of internally socialized first, I think caught a lot of people off guard.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, those conversations obviously need to happen, and we'll talk a little bit about the speed of technology moving faster than regulation sometimes, and how to make sure that we are on track with keeping stuff safe. One of the things I read that came out of it as well was the banning or the suggestion to ban the use of AI completely in automated weapons of war by 2026. So that is obviously a really interesting topic and one that feels scary at first. Maybe you could talk to us a bit more about that. What would an AI automated weapon potentially look like? I've seen Elon Musk talk about kind of drones that could easily train on someone's face or something like that. So maybe you could kind of break that down for us and explain your thoughts and where things sit with that conversation.
Yeah, so we actually call that the LAWS initiative, Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems. And essentially, it very basically definition, it's a weapon system of some kind that the machine makes the decision on its own to attack. So there's no human intervention. So you're saying, it recognizes that today this person's on the top 10 most wanted list, and the image is captured somewhere, and the AI system makes a decision. Okay, I'm going to send a drone to take the strike and take that person out. So there's no real human decision directly involved in that. So that's what we call lethal laws. The concern about that is if it makes a mistake, or the situation has changed, or maybe that person is in a very public area, do these things go haywire? I don't know if you've heard about the story that, China launched the SMILES program back in, was it 2018, 2019? So, if you had points. So if you did good things, you got extra points. If you did bad things, you got points deducted. And if your points fell below a certain level, you couldn't get access to services. You couldn't ride planes or trains, those types of things. And there was a famous incident where I think it was a Chinese newscaster that she was apparently caught jaywalking, knocked her points down, so she got denied services, and she's like, I I didn't jaywalk. I was never in that city and all these other things. And long story short, they sent her the proof a couple of months later. And if you watch it, and it's actually a bus, and on the bus is her picture, like an advertisement. And the bus was making a illegal right turn, but the cameras caught her face and thought it was her walking across the street. And so that's why she got busted. She's like, she was totally innocent. She was right. But for months, she was stuck until they could finally correct that. So if that kind of situation happens, imagine that you have an autonomous weapon system, makes a similar type of mistake, you can't kind of undo that damage.
Yeah, that's a really interesting, a scary example, isn't it? Of where errors can kind of seep into stuff, and these things can become pretty serious. When the suggestion is to ban it, make it illegal, how practical is that? I guess there's always this kind of battle between innovation, where you want people to experiment with all this technology because it can do really great things, and also if you regulate too heavily in one region, well, then maybe another region in the world makes their own rules, and they go off and kind of there's a imbalance of power there. So sort of how practical is it to make that illegal, or is it more about the deterrent of the kind of punishments if it's found?
Yeah, I mean, it's a deterrent, Luke, and it's kind of trying to create a mindset. Are bad actors going to do bad things? Yeah. Is someone going to say, no, screw it, I'm still going to use a lethal autonomous weapon system? There's nothing you can really do to stop that, but you can get most people to agree not to do that. It's almost like nuclear weapons, that a lot of people have them, but the kind of agreement is we're not really going to use them because of the devastation it could cause. So it's the same mode of thinking. There's no way to just absolutely prevent it. That's just not realistically probable. But you can kind of create that mindset and consent and say, okay, wait, let's step back. Let's not take the human out of the equation, because if you do, it's not just these mistakes can happen. You're kind of dehumanizing like war and violence. And I think that's even worse.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. So some people might push back on that and say to dehumanize war might be a good thing if humans weren't involved. When you think about, as kind of dark as it is, if there was a war in future where this technology was involved in some way, what does that look like? Are we talking about a situation where it's going to be kind of machines that would battle each other more, or whether it be more cyber-based, or both of those things? Would humans be involved at all? What would you say to someone who might suggest that would be a better outcome if it had to happen? Big questions, obviously.
It's interesting, right? Because it's probably going to be more cyber stuff rather than robots battling each other. But, to go kind of hyper culture here, we've already seen how this played out in the 1960s. I think Star Trek did an episode on this. I don't quite remember the title or the thing, but there were two planets that were battling each other, but it was all run by computers. It was all simulated. So if there was a simulated attack and something blew up, they would send these people to go off and die in these disintegrator machines, right? But they did that. They've been doing that for 500 years because they said, well, there's no real damage. Our art, our culture, all these things still survive. Just people just, in a simulated attack, I have to die. They totally dehumanized war, right? They forgot kind of the ugliness and stuff as to why we shouldn't have war in the first place. They had no incentive to ever stop, this battle of 500 plus years until, if I remember correctly, Captain Kirk took away their computers. And then suddenly they were forced to confront the realities that we'd have to use real weapons and actually destroy real things. And then they're like, okay, that's probably not a good way to try and resolve our issues.
Interesting. Okay, that's another interesting way to frame stuff. I guess when we're thinking about kind of power dynamics a little bit and that deterrence, and hopefully we obviously won't get to that stage, but the other question that came to mind was, does compute power, so there's lots of global conversations about kind of GPUs and where they are made in the world and that kind of thing, does that in your mind become a very finite, important resource for sort of the powers of the future? Whoever has the most kind of GPU power has the biggest deterrent to sort of not use it in a similar way to sort of nuclear weapons, I guess.
Yeah, and it's true for AI in general, Luke. It's not just about like laws. The real truth is there's already a chip shortage. And when it comes to tech in general, infrastructure has always been kind of the redheaded stepchild, that it's been ignored. We haven't made huge investments into it for almost 40 years. We've just reached the point now where you can chips are only so big. You can only put so many pins on them. And even though they're like these super small cranes now, kind of reach the limit of our computing power. So unless we start stacking millions or billions of chips on top of each other, there's got to be a better way, which is why you see the race for quantum computers, you see the race for neuromorphic chips. So you're starting to see a push really back into infrastructure to support some of this stuff. But you're also right. If someone or some country makes a major breakthrough, it's a huge leg up on everybody else. I mean, to give you an example of this, was it 2014? I was doing some work with TED, and so we actually had IBM Watson watch all the TED and TEDx talks, and so you could go and ask Watson, "Hey, I want to learn about this subject," and Watson would pull up not just the appropriate videos, but the appropriate time segments. Right? You really want to watch this talk from 9 minutes 12 seconds to 13 minutes 42 seconds, whatever. And people thought that was fantastic. And like, why don't you have Watson watch all the videos on YouTube, right? I mean, there's so much stuff out there. You could make life a lot easier. And it's like, there's not enough computing power in the universe right now to do that, right? Think about how many videos are out there and all the training stuff, but that's what we're really talking about. We've reached a point now where the engine can't crank any more horsepower out. There's a lot more work we need to be done. There's a lot of things that could be done faster. It's just our infrastructure is now limited to do that. So again, we can use that for good things like precision medicine, improving food production and safety, or we could use it to create autonomous weapons or deep fake videos. So all about how we choose to wield these tools.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And maybe that is a good thing that we kind of have reached that infrastructure limit at the minute. If there was any chance of maybe slowing things down a little bit, maybe that is sort of the roadblock that might be good. And I hope humans use this stuff for good, obviously. I wanted to ask as well, I spoke to someone recently, Edward Saatchi, who is creating kind of simulation, and he talked about the next phase of AI. We've gone from kind of generative to action AIs. And when we're talking about cyber crime and stuff, we're getting to the point where AI agents can sort of connect to the economy and maybe have their own crypto wallets and that kind of thing. Is that an area that you think can talk about much? It's a slight tangent, but that feels interesting to me, that AI agents can act like humans can on the internet soon. And maybe that's a different sort of avenue of things to consider.
It's not surprising, right? The holy grail has always been kind of this AI concierge, that it knows you as well as you know yourself, so it can anticipate your needs and do things like that. Ever watched the show Black Mirror? There was an episode, I think, called White Christmas with John Hamm, where they actually take your brain engrams, and that's how they create that AI agent for you. It's actually something we do talk about, because it's not just like the crypto wallets, but you're probably going to see in the near future, because people are already using, like Mark is already using AI to try and target you. So it's not like personalized advertising, it's like individualized advertising, because now they know what words to use for you, what rewards or incentives to offer you, what channels they're going to connect you. At some point, it's going to be that AI kind of bot that's trying to sell you something is going to try and convince your AI agent instead, because the AI agent is going to be making these decisions for you. So the control around a crypto wallet or a bank account, this is probably going to happen in the real near future. So it's something we talk about, because again, if something goes wrong, something gets corrupted, you get bad actors, the quickness of the damage and the scale of the damage is so large that it's going to be hard to recover. So we really have to kind of think through, do a lot of scenario planning. Again, this is unfortunately whereas we as humans kind of suck, right? We're not good at anticipating other uses or misuses. That's why we're constantly surprised by something.
That is a trait of humans, isn't it? And, the pandemic being a great example of very few people kind of modeled that correctly of the moment we were in before it happened. Do you think that, again, don't want to be careful not to kind of fearmonger, but do you think that we are in a similar moment now where we're like, okay, all this stuff's happening, but we're modeling it wrong, and maybe we'll see something bad happen first, and then everyone realize, or there'll be an exponential moment, and humans aren't very good at predicting? Or if I got that wrong, I'm not sure.
No, yeah, unfortunately, spot on, Luke. That's our problem, is that we've always had a reactive kind of mindset, right? Something bad happens. Oh, why did this happen? Then we'll take steps to prevent that from happening again. And it's worked for thousands of years, right? But it's like, again, the rate of change is so fast and the volume of impact is so great. It's like we can't do that anymore. Human beings, for better or worse, we're wired for that fast moving immediate threat, right? Something is shaking in the bushes, what's going on? It's the slow moving, long-term stuff that we really suck at, right? You mentioned the pandemic. It's a great example, right? And we look back, it's like, wow, well, how can we didn't see that coming? It's like we did. It was just, it started off slow, right? And so no one thought it'd be as bad as it was until it was. Climate change is the exact same thing, right? So it's like some of these big things, and it's like we're going to reach a point of where the damage is just so big, there's no recovering from it, right? We have to go from this reactive mindset to a proactive mindset when it comes to all emerging technology, actually, right? You talk about the metaverse, for example, you got AI and the metaverse getting combined, and you could do like digital twins. It's helping with like digital farms figure out how to produce more food. At the same time, you have deep fakes, right? You have people, bad actors, using this for malicious intent to trick people or to make them make decisions that may not be in the best interest. That's the challenge.
Yeah, exactly right. That is certainly the challenge, isn't it? One of the other challenges that people are talking about a lot at the moment is slightly more subtle, but it's obviously going to be really important, is that about identity, because we are approaching this moment where it's going to be very difficult to tell what is real online. What do you think about, how we solve that? Obviously, WorldCoin has been in the press a lot recently as a way to sort of scan retinas and prove that you are at least human that way. I don't know if that's the right way to go. I'm not sure, but how do you think about that problem? Because that feels like one that's going to need to be solved relatively soon.
That it's something that we're constantly trying to figure out. Like, WorldCoin, the idea is good. That's the way I should put it. The idea is good. At least you're thinking about a solution. But if I remember right, they've already been able to spoof WorldCoin. So as an authentication system, it's already got some flaws in it. I know that the Screen Actors Guild, they're all over this, trying to protect digital likeness, because there are quite a few celebrities that do use digital twins. I can't name names, but they let them do a greater volume of work. But then there was someone, I think it was in Thailand, they were doing an advertisement for a coffee or something, and it wasn't actually them. It was a total deepfake. So they've been trying to figure out, do you put like some sort of digital fingerprint on there? Does there have to be some sort of like blockchain kind of authentication system? Do you do some hashing or something? That's what everyone's trying to figure out, because there's a lot of traditional tools or methods we could use, but they're all hackable. So how do you do this? Right? And I've heard people say, well, can't you just create AI systems that will look at these like videos or audio files and say whether it's authentic or not? It's like, is it a deep fake? And it's like, well, no, because deep fakes are actually AI systems trained to fool other AI systems. And given the volume of deep fake content that could be put out, again, you run into the infrastructure problem. Every piece of content that gets generated, you have to go check that. And I think, unfortunately, this is starting to become impactful in the average person's life. Look, I don't know if you heard about, this was a few months ago, but these guys were creating deep fake audios of people's children. So they would call up and pretend like you're a kidnapped kid, you got to send us some money, and they hear their kids thing, and they time it so when their kid's in school, so they can't use their phone. And, it's like, it's a very real problem. So we're trying to figure out what's an effective solution that can't really be hacked, right?
Yeah, and it's scary talking about it, isn't it? Because yes, all of these things are happening and they are problematic. Like, are we close to finding a solution, or is that something that's just that's happening now? Like that is the conversation. Like,
I don't think we have like I can't say we're close to a global kind of solution. By that I mean like one that's kind of ease across all kind of content. Right now, it's kind of like the price of freedom is ever constant vigilance. You have to do the same thing. So if you hear something, you see a video, you have to kind of pay attention and say, does something seem a little off? There's something like weird about the body language. wrong with shadowing. You really just got to pay attention. But images are the hardest to detect because there's no motion, right? It's just a still image. Like there's that deep fake of the Pentagon, like I think on fire or something, and that's really hard to look at and say, is that real or not? That's, I think, the challenge that we're going to have.
Yeah, I spoke to someone on this topic recently as well who was talking about actually maybe the most obvious cases, like a world leader saying something malicious, are probably not actually the biggest threat because they'll be very scrutinized and people will be aware to scrutinize them. But if we get to a point where people just sort of lose hope and that they don't know what is real at all, and it's sort of death by a thousand cuts because people just sort of stop trusting media, would you agree that is shaping up to be more of a problem? Is that's where people should really need to pay attention, is not sort of losing trust, and I guess trustworthy sources are going to be ever more important.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem, in that we're rapidly approaching a state where people are not going to believe in information. And think about how crazy that is that you can't really trust information, or you have one or two very trusted sources, and those could be totally faked out. The 2024 elections that are coming up in the United States, everyone's calling it the deepfake election. In fact, we've already seen instances now of candidates creating deepfakes of their opponents and distributing that out. But they're doing it. It's like on this massive scale. They're sending it to like these 1,000 people over here. These 1,000 people are getting like a different one. Because it happens on such a smaller scale, it's harder to even detect that's going on in the first place. So what does that mean? And then you can take that down to the average person. I mean, I hate to say this, but like deep fakes got their start in revenge porn. There used to be a mobile app called Deep Porn. So you have a bad breakup with someone, was an app where you could take some pictures or videos of them, and was kind of not the greatest quality, thankfully, but create a fake pornographic video of them. What does that average person do? What's their recourse?
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Once it's there, the damage is kind of done initially, at least, isn't it? Yeah, it is really difficult stuff for sure. We are going to get onto AI for Good Global Summit and Initiative to talk about good stuff as well. I wanted just to get your thoughts on, the other conversation is around employment and universal basic income as well. The idea that AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. So universal basic income, where we get a sort of set amount of money, might be something that happens. It's in its early stages. I don't know. But how do you feel about that? Is that something that we should, in the same way that when we were talking about the pandemic and things coming, is that something we should take seriously, that people should just at least think about, be aware of, research perhaps, or not?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it gets debated a lot, right? Should there be some minimal level of quality of life guaranteed through UBI? Should people be able to own their own data and monetize that, sell it to these companies? Is that another way of generating income? It's tough to say, but I think what a lot of people also kind of overlook is, while a lot of jobs will go away, a lot of jobs will get created. So like the World Economic Forum has said, in the next 5 years, about 85 million jobs will probably go away because of AI and robot automation. From the same time period, 97 million new jobs are going to be created. So I think there's also a question of, well, how do we retrain some of the existing workforce to get ready for these jobs? And how do you train the future workforce for these jobs? Because I think a 5-year-old kid today, by the time they graduate high school, 40% of the jobs that exist today will be gone. Will be different types of jobs. I think that's something we don't talk about enough. And again, it's this reactive mindset, right? I think people think, well, autonomous vehicles, that's 20 years away, right? We don't need to worry about taxi drivers and truck drivers. And it's like, no, autonomous vehicles are probably like 5 or 6 years away. If you're not retraining those guys now, they're going to be left in the cold. I think that's really the biggest challenge. We talk about job loss. Yeah, but I think it's also a shift, and we're not really doing enough to get people ready for that. Singapore, I think, has actually done a magnificent job. When Sophia the robot was granted citizenship by Saudi Arabia back in 2016, that really triggered them. Like, well, wait a second. There's going to be this whole tsunami of change coming. They actually jumped out in front of it and started saying, like, okay, what are those skills going to be? How we start retraining people? They put money and resources in. They created things for the average person to learn and figure out how to use. I kind of wish that happened on a much greater scale across all the countries, because we're totally unprepared for this massive change about that.
Yeah, it's a massive issue. And, if there's parents listening and maybe their kids are in the education system as it is at the moment, maybe they are thinking about going to university or that kind of thing. Obviously, it's sort of an impossible question to ask, but in some ways, there's the line of like everything's going to change so much, like it almost feels a little bit wasted time, certain things to learn apart from, like the social skills and the transferable skills and stuff like that. But at the same time, you don't want to kind of do nothing and wait for the world to change and not be proactive and not progress with your career. So maybe what would be your like advice or your sort of framework for thinking about if you're that age and you're about to go into the workforce, how do you approach that in a proactive way, knowing that so much change is coming?
It's a great question, Luke. I actually tell people you have to think about this in terms of not artificial intelligence and human intelligence, but hybrid intelligence. So while machines are good at some things, there are things that people are much better at. And it's the complement of human and machine together, right? It's human capabilities augmented by machine abilities is really the future. So, the creative thinking, the ability to imagine, to the kind of the instinctive and, make that, next leap of conclusion. Those are not things that machines are good at. Machines can only do what we teach them. We don't know how to teach creativity. And so I always tell people there's 5 skills. It doesn't matter what the jobs of tomorrow are. It really doesn't. It doesn't matter if you're a space miner or you're a farmer, right? You're creating precision drugs for people. There's 5 skills all the jobs of the future are going to require. Creative thinking, the essential skills, so communication, collaboration, negotiation, facilitation, problem solving, understanding how to use some of these emerging technology tools, the capabilities. So you don't need to know how the hammer is built, you just have to know how to use the hammer. And then some domain to apply these skills into, whether that's healthcare or finance or marketing, whatever it might be. Those are the 5 things you have to have in your toolkit. And you can do it. You can be able to do any job of tomorrow that way. It's not rocket science. But again, everyone thinks like, I have to know what the job is. I know what the activities of the job are, and I can reverse engineer the skills. And it's like, we know what the bag of skills have to be. It's going to be, we don't teach most of those things in school. It's going to be a massive change to the curriculum.
Yeah, that's well said, and that's really valuable way to think about it as well, because I think a lot of people have got that question, and that helps frame it in a really good way for sure. Another sort of trend that I'm seeing that I think people are sort of writing off a little bit, but I've spoken to some individuals about relationships with AI and actually having like an emotional attachment to machines. There's a famous story of Replica, which has like a partner that you can create, and people are getting very attached to them. For better or for worse, there's interesting arguments both sides. Maybe this is a bit of a jump, but from how I understand, there is a sort of a population decline, and as there's kind of post-pandemic and cost of living crises in a lot of places, generally people are having less kids, and that is a problem long term. Maybe that's a cycle that will just go through and it'll come around the other way. Do you connect those dots at all, that people will sort of get attached to AI and have relationships, and is that something that you think about at the UN and you talk about? It's just something that I find interesting, if nothing else.
It is, and I hate to say it's already started happening, right? You may have heard of that woman a few months ago that used ChatGPT to create a boyfriend. So ChatGPT became her boyfriend, and now I think she sells that service to other people. Warning for parents, if you got your kids listening to this right now, in Japan, they've already created like these haptic suits. And so you can actually have virtual sex with an AI system, right? Full sensation. And, I know a lot of people are like, that's crazy, all that kind of stuff. But more and more people are unfortunately gravitating to that because there's no fear of rejection, right? If that AI has been trained to be your companion, guess what it's going to do, right? It's not going to reject you. And are we going to sub out human relationships for those machine relationships? Unfortunately, we can see a very realistic path to that. And you're talking about the population decline. I know most people think that's ludicrous, but world population is still growing. But it's going to tap out, I think, around 9.6 billion people, and then we're going to hit into a pretty bad decline. We've had several generations, as you're talking about, older kids, one kid, no kid, that we're going to suffer through that. If you look at China, they're already starting to see the impacts of decades of the one-child policy hit them. And we worry about that because there's a point of no return where we can't sustain humanity, can't sustain the population, a rapid decline. We could actually go extinct that way. And if we have these other things like people now foregoing human reproduction because they're in a relationship with a machine, that's just going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, it's another big thing to think about, isn't it? And yeah, kind of fascinating topic as well. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here, of course. Let's talk about the AI for Good Global Summit and the initiative there. Bring some positivity to us. What are you working on there? What can we get kind of excited about and yeah, optimistic about?
Well, we have over 280 projects going on right now, but we've completed, I think, the last 5 years, about 170 projects. We've been able to impact 1.1 billion people positively so far. So the summit is part of the initiative, and it's kind of a little bit of a readout and a way to get more volunteers, build out the ecosystem. But the last summit we did, back in July, it was very actually robot focused. So we've seen a lot of advancements for robotics, and so you're seeing like the different things like helping to fight fires, like especially the wildfires or brush fires that are going on. You're seeing actually more empathy robots. So at least before the pandemic, loneliness was the biggest illness in the world. So this kind of like empathetic robot, again, not meant to be substituting human relationships, but just to give people a safe space, feel something connected, something so they can build their confidence to either get help or, build regular relationships. But you're also, you're seeing a lot of other things down more in like law enforcement and all that. Everyone keeps asking me, where's Rosie the robot from the Jetsons? I guess everybody wants a robot maid. But right now, robots don't have the dexterity to do that. But you have on some limited things. I mean, some people have like Roombas and stuff like that. I mean, that's technically a robot. But we actually saw there are people now that they've actually been able to create like a robotic arm that can do windows. So maybe one day soon you'll have your Rosie the robot. But right now, robots are very singular in function. They really can only do one or two things for you. But we're just trying to apply that to major things right now, like fighting wildfires.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Good to hear positive stuff there. And yeah, we'll get to the robot helper and maid in future, no doubt, for sure. Yeah, okay, there's so much awesome stuff in there. Thank you so much, Neil. Because I think that the thing that I wanted to sort of get out of this episode was just the average person to listen to it and be like, okay, here's what is happening. Here's what to be aware of, and here's maybe the mind frame to think about. So if you were going to kind of summarize stuff and for just somebody listening who is AI is starting to affect their lives, how would you say to them to kind of approach the future? A big theme seems to be kind of humans and machines together is the way to go. But yeah, what would be your kind of final thoughts on
that? Two pieces of advice for everybody, Luke. First, look at things as an opportunity rather than a threat. I know that's hard to do, but that's really the best way you can make use of this technology. I'm not trying to say there are no bad things that are going to happen, but if you look through the lens of opportunity, you'll find ways to avoid some of those threats and actually make some good things happen for you, your work, your community, whatever it might be. The second is, don't look at everything as automation. That's the biggest challenge, right? We're used to computers being able to do something faster, or cheaper, less errors. But if you think about automation, you're only tapping into 20% of the capabilities of AI, right? The most successful AI solutions are leveraging those new capabilities. It's the innovation, find a new way of actually doing the work. And I know it's tough because I hear a lot of people say, like, you're trying to fix something that's not broken. In a way, that's kind of true, but we also know that what works today is not going to work necessarily in the future. And if you jump ahead of that curve, you don't need to be a passenger on this journey. You could be the driver. So take advantage of that opportunity.
Nice. Yeah, well said, for sure. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much, Neil. That's really, really fascinating conversation. Where can people kind of follow you and, keep up to date with what's going on with your work as well?
Well, you can actually go to my website, which is my name, neilsahota.com. I'm always pushing out new content and articles. Of course, you can find me on social media like LinkedIn, Instagram. Again, my handle is just my name. But I do publish a LinkedIn newsletter. So if you're wondering about things, what's going on in AI and the metaverse, because I actually read about both, I encourage you to check it out. I'm always talking about the latest things in different kinds of industries and stuff, as well as some, things for good. So please check that out.
Love it. All those links will be in the description for sure. So yeah, encourage everyone to go and follow Neil, and thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Luke.